Good evening, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Coach's Corner. Tonight, despite the further ado, I'm going to hand it off to Bari to kick things off.
All right, hello. This is your, I don't want to say your favorite host, maybe my favorite host today. Favorite host for today. Bari of Anglesey, hosty McHost Face. We got a great panel here, and I like to have them introduce themselves. So I usually do with the pointing. So we'll start off with this gentleman right here. Go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hey, I'm Felix Del Rey. I am Atlantia's warlord.
There we go. And then next we got this guy right here.
Hey everybody, I'm William Bedford. I'm Exoda the Warlord here in Atlantia.
All right, and that's everybody. So we got a good
show. Whoa.
Easy.
Yes, and this lovely lady, Baroness over here.
I am Teagan of Anglesey, and I'm the Northern Regional Commander for Atlantia, Armored.
All right, thanks for joining us. Yeah, and I think we'll be focusing mainly on Armored today. And if you saw the announcements for the show, we were originally going to have His Royal Majesty Randal and Duke Christoph, who just stepped down. And I think we had some last minute shuffling around. I think Randal is realizing how busy being king for the first time is. They just stepped up coronation this weekend, so he got busy. And then Christoph might be a combination of having just finished a reign, which is. I've never done a reign before, but I can imagine it's a lot of work, which is why I haven't fought in a crown yet. Not that I would win, but you never know. Mistakes can happen. And also I think he does like some work with the hurricane relief stuff. So he may be very busy with that. So we hope that everyone down in Trimaris and Meridies and Southern Atlantia are going to be nice and safe. Anyway, so here we are with the show. I just want to say that I have had a lot of experience with Atlantia, so I know the three guests here very well. I've actually known Teagan for close to 30 years now, and I fought with Sir Felix and Sir William a lot. And I used to go to at least 2 to 3 Atlantean events every year for like the last decade, plus back when I was fighting in the 90s. So if we could, I just want to show, I want to do a quick intro. I think Atlantia is one of the best units out there at Pennsic, at least for, for like a good medium large, I guess it'd probably be like a large size army, right? You guys would still be one of the larger armies out there. Not quite as big. Maybe it's a medium large, not quite as big as the East or the Mid, but it's still a good group. Bring a lot of talent and a lot of good organization. I want to ask Sadb if she can bring up one of the videos. Which one you got? Let's go with this one. And would someone like to explain what's going on here? Let's use this as like a good intro to Atlantia.
Yeah, this is a Pennsic field battle from last year. They allowed combat archeries and a couple of the field battles. So this is us marching up into engagement, but our archers can kind of fire when ready. And so depending on their comfortableness with their range while moving, you can see some of them start to take shots off. But we're maybe halfway across the battlefield here at Pennsic as they start their initial salvos.
Yeah, I remember. We were talking about this a little bit before we started the show that I was actually across from this, and it was very intimidating. I don't know how effective the archers were. I don't know how many kills they got, but it's certainly I was one of the commanders in our unit, and it was certainly disruptive. And I remember this when you guys eventually made it all the way to the top of that hill and ran over our little group of people, and then we had to make adjustments for the next battle to sort of deal with you. And a lot of times, for those who haven't been to Pennsic or have been to Pennsic many years and just haven't really been on the commanding and organizing side of things, a lot of times what happens in these battles is you come up the plan. If you lose, you make adjustments, or if your unit gets in a bad situation, you make adjustments. And we talked about this. Oh, I got a visitor. We talked about this sort of before the show about, I guess, just the difficulty of getting an army organized and on the field and ready and moving. So, and the quote I said was, I think a big mistake a lot of commanders make is they imagine our armies as like Warhammer pieces, miniature figures where you can sort of tell everyone where to go. And we realize that once you get out there, there's a lot more chaos and it can be difficult. So would one of you guys like to talk a little bit about maybe what that's like from an Atlantian perspective? Maybe Billy, like what's that like from an Atlantian perspective to try to like get people organized? Let's talk about like a field battle. What's it like on the field? Where are you getting your commands from? How are you sort of executing them? How do you deliver this out to the people, et cetera, et cetera?
Yeah, I mean, I think pre-planning for scenarios is a big deal, right? So field battles probably the least planning required, right? Something like a limited front or with specific goals in mind, making sure that the commanders and the leaders of specific units understand the goals that are outlined to win is key to success. So going out there and having a good time is obviously great, but making sure that we can communicate what we want to achieve is key. So Teagan does an excellent job of making sure that people understand their role when they're within her command. I try to do my very best to be very loud, and I, in between, try to make sure that I'm up to date on what the latest changes might be. So in our specific scenario, Felix being a warlord, say we were in field battle 2 and things went really poorly. Felix may come back and say, hey, we didn't have the left side on that one. The East is going to give it to us this time. So we got to get folks motivated to the front, and then Teagan's got to figure out what their guys are going to do, and then what I'm going to do on my side. And we work very well together with that. Being loud is part of it. Yeah, I think that's probably how I'd like to start that off. Felix, do you agree with that sort of sentiment that distributed model is the way we try to do things?
Yeah, definitely. So, I mean, I guess it depends on how far you want to back it up, but I think one way to think about it is, since we're not just setting up little Warhammer models, is these are people that are on their vacation, and they have maybe they're balancing a lot of things, and that's okay. But what can we do to kind of help ensure that they get to the battle and that they're informed? And so there's some pre-battle aspects to that, and Billy actually takes point on this. Is it posts to different forums and things, letting people know when our muster is going to be. And muster is something we do before the battle, where we'll actually discuss what the battle is, what the battle plan is, who the unit commanders are, what the initial plans are, and then after that it becomes kind of the loud communications and on-field adjustments. And then sometimes you get enough time in between battles, say if you run multiple battles, that you can kind of do another little mini muster and talk together as a group. Other times you don't have time, so you do have to kind of delegate out amongst commands. I would say this year we had several different unit commanders, Billy, Teagan, and Randal, who couldn't make it, and they were super helpful to be able to kind of delegate to those folks. I would say in previous years I've had this maybe sometimes just reach everybody just with my voice on the field, and that can be a little more challenging. I usually lose my voice by the third day, I'd say.
And how many people, I know Teagan has this number, how many people did you guys bring to Pennsic this year for heavy fighting?
Was it 125?
90, yeah, 100. Was it 90 armored and then 12 archers? Is that something like that?
Yep, thereabouts. So in any given scenario, it might be a little less, but thereabouts, about 90 fighters and 12-ish archers. This was a weird year too. I mean, like with the weather and things.
And I wanted you guys to mention that, because I mean, I've been to Pennsic, I've been to Gulf Wars both several times, and I've seen videos of some of the other bigger wars out there, and so that gives an idea when you talk about like the command structure, the talking to everybody on the field. Like 90 is a lot of people, or 100, whatever that is a lot of people for one person to be able to talk to everybody. So you have to have some sort of like sub-command system. Do you guys, so I'll say in the East, Teagan, how many people do we have last year in the East?
260.
Okay, that sounds about right. Yeah. So yeah, with 260. Yeah. So we typically break it into, we have effectively 7. Actually, we have effectively 8 units. So, and I don't know what 260 divided by 8 is. It's probably a little over 30, 32 or 3 or something like that. 32 and a half. Let me get my calculator out. 32 and a half each. Teagan's pulled up for spreadsheet now. That's funny. But yeah, so with us, we typically break up into like sort of 8 units. And I think one of them I would classify as kind of a household unit, but the rest of it is all sort of regional. Now, sometimes households might fit into certain regions. And for example, the region I'm sort of assigned to by my zip code, I don't actually fight with because a bunch of people at our local practice are part of a household that fights in another region. And so I fight with them and we all sort of fight together. So how do you guys break it down? I don't think you just have one giant region.
No, we don't typically. Atlantia in the past has had a large household driven training regimen in the past, right? And so that's still very pervasive in Atlantia.
Yeah.
I grew up in House Bedford. We rolled with the Landing Cavalry, which was a coalition with Eben Wolf and a number of other houses. That was the job, right? And those folks knew how to do that job, and commands may or may not have been relayed, or they just may have said, go do the thing, right? That's shifted significantly in recent past. There's still households, and I'll give full props to folks like House Gilchrist, which is our big green unit. They are absolute workhorses, but they also get in the line and say, what's the plan, right? And so it's shifting to be in line with goal-based outcomes. So I would say that the way we had it split up this last year, we had a small mobile unit that was between Randal and Wilhelm, and then a larger, less mobile unit that was commanded by myself, and sort of a hammer to go to that anvil that was under Teagan's command in the north. And I think that was manageable, given the numbers that we had. Yeah, I think that's a fair way to put that. You guys want to hop in here, feel free.
So, what was the question? So you mentioned the CAV unit. So for the people listening, like what do you consider a CAV unit? How does a CAV unit function? CAV, it's like a bunch of small spears that run around real fast with archers in between them, right?
Yeah, not necessarily spears. I think a lot of times in Atlantia we might have shields and some mobile spears. But yeah, I think that ultimately it refers to the mobility. So the ability to get somewhere fast, and as well as to stay mobile. So people that can be constantly moving on the field.
Okay.
Folks with wheels. Yeah.
Hey, Sadb, can you pull up that other video real quick? Because I think this will sort of give a good illustration of maybe how I think this would be a good illustration of how you guys are organized. So right here we have Dark Moon from the Mid Realms on the other side, panning over, and here we see Atlantia. Can you pause right there? Pause. Oh, wait. Go back just a bit and pause. Go back just a little bit so we can see them. Nope, that's Dark Moon. Wait for it to come through. And then when they're all in the frame, there. Okay, so I can't tell. You can tell a little bit how this is broken up, but like once you see the charge happen, it seems pretty clear to me that you had like sort of 2 units, and one unit kind of had like a far left flank job. So is this how you are organized?
Yeah. So if we're looking at our screen here, so screen left, we have Billy's unit, which he referred to as our anvil unit. And then uphill, we have Teagan's, I think Billy was calling that the hammer unit. And then filing in behind them is our CAV unit. And then over to the left is me and a couple other folks that were just kind of filling in the gap in between units, just to screen a little bit, since we did have a little gap there, as well as me in the back be able to call the ball on the second order effect. So after the initial engagement, being able to rally folks and move them afterwards.
Okay.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I was gonna say, so it kind of looks like 2 units, but and you can't really see me. I'm in the back, but I think one of my spears like sticking up. But I like to think of it more as like on the bias. So, it looks like on screen, right, that this unit, my unit's a little more forward and Billy's unit on the left is a little more back. But it really, when we did the charge, then the charge came in on the bias and the middle just kind of filled in at that point.
Yeah, one of the reasons why I brought this video up, because I remember I watched all the videos that were available after Penzik, and I remember this particular shot right here just showed like a really good execution of a good plan, and it was really impressive. But what's funny is when I watch this stuff, I wasn't sure it was going to be a good execution of a good plan, because a lot of times when I see this, no offense to Atlantia, but any unit, I never know if they're going to do something good or something bad. And a lot of times I see this happening, particularly as a spear person, I'm thinking, ooh, if that unit just walks up and stands there, they're going to get just chewed to pieces by spears. And we have, Teagan's probably aware of this. We have this joke about how we went to War of the Wings probably like 8 or 9 years ago. And we had a unit of spears. And Sir Rundor told us that the other unit in front of us was nothing but shields. And he was like, try to stay alive. They're going to charge and run us over. And as we approach them, we hear their commander yell, okay, that unit's got a lot of spears. And we thought, oh my God, here it comes. And instead of charging, they just turtled up. And then they let us shoot them apart. So that's what I thought might happen here. But if we can play this video, you'll see that's not what happened.
Oh, 100%. Like if we went up and just stood in front of Darkmoon with our shields up, we'd be dead in a minute flat.
Yeah. And Darkmoon is a pretty good, I think Darkmoon's a good, they're sort of like a good middle, like kind of unit. Like they're built for, they got a lot of shields, but also have a lot of spears. In this case, you see they've got a lot of spears in their unit, and you guys call it a charge.
Yeah. So in this one, Teagan called the ball on timing for the charge.
Yeah, and you can see you pretty much made it through them. I don't know how many of them died and how many of them have sort of, broke rank and ran away.
Yeah. But you can see then it's like now the army's kind of turning it back down the field, which is what we want.
Yeah. So how did you guys go about? I think it was a good plan. How did you guys go about executing it? Like, did you have to shift people around, or I guess you called that the hammer unit. So like what is I know what I assume I know what you mean by hammer and anvil, but maybe somebody listening doesn't. What is a hammer and anvil?
Yeah, so I would say actually our army mostly what was the hammer. So in this case, the main two items here was to take the hill and time the charge well. And so it was shifting everybody up and then shifting everybody up, kind of as we reached engagement, calling a good timing on a charge, which Teagan did beautifully. And then after that, it just becomes rallying and getting back in the fight. And in this one, I believe the two chucks rolled the unit on our right, and then they turned around to actually punch us in the back. And so myself and a couple other people actually turned around and kind of just slowed them down a little bit while we yelled for people to rally and get back in, as opposed to getting gigged in the back while we mopped up.
Do you guys practice the reforms? I'll tell you, that is so hard. And not that reforming is hard, but one of the things I've found is that reforming, there has to be a pace to it based on the size of the battle and the unit. So if you're doing, like you guys do the 10-man team at Penzik, so the reforms, one person yells a reform, you grab 2 people, then you go, but like I've made the mistake in the past where I was so used to that. And then I would call a reform at Penzik. I grab 2 people, turn around and go, run down the hill and turn around, and I'm with 3 people,
Yeah, I think it is hard. And one of the things, because I'm on the Atlantia 10-man team, and we did some practices at some events, and one of the basics is just like, what is the rally cry, and not the word rally, right? Because the other side's probably also going to say rally. So just figuring out what is a word that registers with everybody and then gets people together. Like I think for you, Bari, in the East, it's easy to just say blue, like at Penzik, blue, or East, right?
Yeah,
but for one thing, as a commander, I've been still trying to think about like, what is a good rally cry for Atlantia? If anybody has any suggestions, please drop them in the chat.
Yeah, Atlantia is not a good word to yell.
No.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And, I noticed that. So when we would fight with, the usually the allied mercenary unit that we're with is called, we call ourselves the Bog or the Bog Troopers. And I remember the one year I was Warlord, first battle, I was yelling Bog Troopers, and it just doesn't carry it. People don't hear it. And then I would just yell Anglesey, and then they would just get mad at us because we always try to take the credit for everything. And there's a whole lot of internal bog politics there. But I'm like, I'm sorry, you can hear Anglesey, like it's a very clear word.
Everybody knows what that means, right? So the
Yeah.
key is finding a word that everybody understands and then getting the buy-in from everybody. And I'm still working on it.
Yeah. So if your team happens to wear yellow tape or maybe gold tape, gold is not a good rally word because it sounds like a bad word that we reserve for only bad situations on the field. You know, gold, mold, or bold, or anything like that is not good.
I think the other part of it is for sure that it would be nice if we had a silver bullet. I will say when we're on east side at Pennsic, I do just yell blue at people, and that's helpful. You can also grab other people who aren't, and just be like, rally with us, let's go. But I think the other part of it is getting people used to working with each other as well as kind of hearing your voice. So, for example, Teagan's new to doing melee stuff with Atlantia. She's done lots of melee stuff in Atlantia over the years, but newer to the command chain. So I think some of it was at Kingdom practices, having her be in charge besides people who get used to hearing her voice. And I would say that she's great to work with at Pennsic. She's as a really great, I don't know if it's because she's a lawyer or what, but as a really good, loud, distinctive voice. I never have to wonder who's calling everyone to turn or wheel. I know that's Teagan, right?
It's only distinctive in Atlantia. She sounds like a lot of Easterners.
Yeah, it's because I'm from the northern part of Atlantia.
But yeah, so I think that's the other piece. Is working with each other and getting used to each other's just literal voices, like who's calling for what. I think back in the day, we used to practice rally drills and things like that at Kingdom War practices. I wouldn't say that we were much better at rallying back when we did that per se, but we put a lot of work into different ways of getting after that. I would say it is a smaller group. Back in the day, we might stack 200 people, and that's a lot more to manage. When you're at a maximum of 90 to 100, it's a little easier to reach everyone with your voice.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I had a thought there. What was I going to say? Do you have how successful are you with the fallback command? Getting people to fall back.
From a strategic standpoint, I think it works really well when you're doing small group stuff. In fact, I was doing some drills with our 10-person team after our big melee events, and the fallback command was really good at catching the fast guys first and the slow guys after you kill the fast guys, right? So taking a couple steps back to fall back, and they just yelled charge. You get, the spry dudes first, and you hit them in the ribs, and then the next guys come up. But as from a large group standpoint, I think moving anything but forward is hard.
We had this show with the mid realm with Sir Pellinor, and he said the same thing. And I have to agree with us. I mean, we had we do an event called 100 Minutes War up here. It's a really nice event. It's kind of like the Pennsic Woods Battle. The only difference is that they actually count the kills. So the winner is whichever side gets the most kills. And so with that kind of battle, when you're not trying to control a flag, you're sort of kind of meeting in the middle, and then if you start losing, you're trying to draw them back closer to your res point to try to sort of rebalance things. And we had one year we had a setup. We have a different field every year. It's a big campground. We moved to a different spot every year, and we had this we had a road with some woods on either side. So the road was clearly like kind of a choke point bridge sort of thing. And the side we were against had the spear. The side we were against had the spear superiority, so we had to beat them with our charges. But the problem we ran into is that we could get our folks to charge, and then they would just keep pushing forward like we were going towards something, and we're trying to get them to fall back, and eventually they would just make it back to the res point and then get it tritted out and get killed. And it was you would yell fall back, but it's just like, you got a lot of people that have a lot less experience than we do, right? They're into that lizard brain fight and flight kind of mode, and it's very difficult. So as you said, it's anything other than moving forward. What would you say? Someone in the chat said spike as a rally call. Interesting.
That was a decent idea. We should think about it. Maybe.
Yeah, that's Finn. He's from my barony. And Spike, so Barry, you may not know this, but you know how Atlantia, it's the seahorse, but it has a spike,
Okay.
like a unicorn spike. So Spike.
I've seen like a little tiny foam seahorse. That's the only one I've seen. we got that in court one year, the year that we were told to go to court. And then we arrived and the queen says, "Oh, what are you guys doing here?" Hey, William, you had a topic you want to bring up?
Oh yeah, I mean, so you'd mentioned how at 100 Minutes War, it's about number of kills, right? And I think that part of the planning and execution phase, it's important to pay attention to what not only the goals of the battle are, but also the resources that you're expending. So you hit on a lot of subtextual things in your description of when you're losing, you pull back towards res and try to get back and digging into what that means. So for example, in your case, where it's the number of kills, you don't die cheap, right? First off, don't die cheap in that scenario. As opposed to an unlimited res battle where you're trying to control a bridge and you can do column charge after column charge until those guys are tired, right? Mm-hmm. Pulling back towards res in the 100 Minutes War scenario, the resource that you're expending in that is your lives, right? And you may do the same thing if you're in a scenario with unlimited resurrections, pull back closer to res because the resource you're expending there is energy. And so if you have unlimited reses and a goal in front of you, don't just go for the glory, pay attention to what you're spending, right? For me, I'm a big guy, right? I got a lot of stick to itness. I don't got a lot of energy. And my secret is I'm always tired. But not everybody can hang the whole time, right? And so if you spend it all in the first half hour and we got to control it at the time call at the end, you failed from a planning and resource management perspective. And so to borrow your Warhammer sort of idea, right? What are you spending to win this game? And so we try to really pay attention to the gamesmanship and the outcome, which is why we ask the questions that we ask. That's why Felix is chasing you down on your way to your vigil, asking you why. So can you clarify these rules? Because it matters.
I gotta say for the people listening, my God, especially Teagan and Felix are the most organized commanders at command meetings I've ever seen. We go to the meeting of the crowns and Teagan already has a spreadsheet of every kingdom and she's tracking it like she's got a fantasy football team or something and like writing everything down, which is why I asked her what the numbers were because I knew she would have them. And then we go, what was it? Then didn't you bring a laminated map of the woods to like one of
Felix has the laminated map. I have access to giant printers in my office, so I could print out like the scenarios on big paper. But yeah, Felix has the laminated map. You know, yes, it was like draft day at the Beer and Brats, but
well, let me ask you guys this. So I'm going to ask two levels. Number one, how important is performing well at Pennsic? And I want to say this from two perspectives. One, how important is it to Atlantia? And how important is it to the three of you? Because those might be different answers.
It's a really good question. It's simple but complex. I could take a quick crack at it. I think that I think performing well is important. I think most people care about their sport. I think different people see, and I guess for Pennsic it is proximal to us, so it's a war where we have a lot of people go to, and we're vested in it. And Atlantia used to be part of one of the principal kingdoms, right? We came out of the east, so it's kind of baked into the culture. And as far as we want to do well, and I would say from my perspective, I want the army to do well because people put a lot of time and effort into training and logistics and getting to war. And people usually have a better time when they're doing well. And so I care about winning, but a lot of that's baked into the fact that I want the people who are taking time out of their busy lives and their busy vacations to do something very difficult with us and fight in an hour and a half, res battle day after day to enjoy themselves. And I think people enjoy themselves more when they're successful.
Yeah, I have to agree. There's nothing worse than going out and getting slaughtered because of bad leadership or bad
Oh, yeah.
plans or whatever. I'll say from our perspective, and again, it's a little bit different for you guys, but from our perspective, I don't want to say that we don't take Gulf Wars seriously, but if this is how seriously we take Pennsic, I mean, Gulf Wars is way below that. I mean, typically we'll bring maybe 10 to 20 people at Gulf Wars. And I mean, I think the last Gulf Wars I went to, one of the battles I fought with the mid. We had like maybe I think we had like a conflict with a rapier fighting, and there's like maybe 4 of us. Then we just basically became 4 extra people for the mid. And versus the East, like at Pennsic, we really like maybe sometimes take it too seriously.
Do you
So-
think
Yeah.
that's
Go ahead, Billy.
I was gonna say, do you think that's because the East is a little further away from Gulf Wars than, say, Trimaris is or Atlantia?
Yeah.
Because I think you could float between 2 groups as Bari, right? And it's a little easier to deal with the sway of that. I think Atlantia is very proud to be one of the larger allies at Pennsic, right? We're also a pretty decent sized force at Gulf Wars, and we usually have a job to do. I think we're pretty goal oriented. I keep talking about goals, but if you say we take and hold the center, we get the job done, and we're proud to get that job done. And it's many a post mortem under the tent where we say, we lost that battle, but we kept our point.
Yeah.
And that's a big point of pride.
Yeah, I was going to say that too. So this is my first year really being integrated with Atlantia. So from a personal perspective, I wanted us to perform well because it was my first time, and just want to make sure the right pieces were in place. That was important to me personally. But I do agree with Billy is that Atlantia at Pennsic is usually given a job. It's given a flag, it's given a structure, it's given a side. And so I know, yes, we want the whole side to perform well, but it was, important that we did our job. We did what was asked of us and expected.
Yeah, I've been part of the pre-Pennsic planning teams twice now, although this year I was more of a backseat. Weird thing, it's like when I was an unbelt, I was like in the front. That's kind of how we do it a lot. A lot of times, like once you get knighted, you're kind of like a lot of your job becomes like another unbelt, sort of give them a chance to kind of shine a little bit. And we also find the unbelts kind of take their jobs a little more seriously in a lot of cases. But yeah, a lot of times, yeah, we'll do pre-Pennsic planning, and like especially something like this year, we had the armored town and cathedral battle. And for those that weren't at Pennsic, it was just basically like a bunch of took up most of the battlefield and a bunch of huts with sort of a weird shaped kind of cathedral in the middle of it. And yeah, when we do the Pennsic planning for that, we're kind of like, oh, the two chucks are this kind of unit. So the year that we had the two chucks on our side, we're like, we're going to put them in the cathedral. And then this year we thought, I think the mid is probably going to put them in the cathedral. And so we're kind of looking at like, Atlanta, we need a group that can control this entire flank. We're like, well, that's not going to be the West Kingdom because they don't have enough people. And Stiora, I mean, Sven can only kill maybe 12 or 13 people with his left sword and then 2 more people with his right sword. No, he's listening right now. So, but I think Anstiora only brought like a small number of people. You can't control an entire flank. But Atlantia, it's like we got 90 fighters, 100 fighters, and it's a pretty consistent unit. Although I will say that at least in the past, there have been some years when you've had some wonky ideas out there. Sometimes it's been pretty good lately. Every now and then, I maybe get like a tourney guy in charge or something that comes up something crazy. But like I said, we've had our own crazy ideas too. I was talking about offline. Hey, can I throw this one out there? I know that you guys have had kind of a big uptick in the training in the northern region, with just like your sort of yearly sort of melee training. Can you guys talk about that?
Yeah, I'll talk about that. So, and I sort of touched on this when I did the SCA Coaches Corner before Pennsic, the getting your army ready for war one. So when I was approached to take on this role, I had already been doing some practices, but I really wanted to ramp it up. And part of it was not just for the fighters in the kingdom, but part of it was also for me, because like I didn't know everybody, and I wanted to get to know everybody and who does what and who fights with who and who fights with what weapon and where are our assets and how can we, you know, best utilize them. So since I came on as the commander, you know, last year, I think I did five practices, and some of them were big. Some of them had like 30 fighters and some of them had 6. And that's okay, you know, because there's benefits to having a ton of people, and there's benefits to just having a small group that you can really, really focus on, and they can get all their questions answered in more intimate space. So, and I'm trying, and, you know, we're continuing that. You know, in my mind, there's like a melee season, and it starts in March with Gulf Wars and it ends like mid-November. So that's when I try to, you know, maximize and get practices in. Although I did do one practice in January because I found an indoor space, but that's the exception.
So what kind of stuff do you do at your practices? Like
Yeah. So
I know. I was there in the
I know
beginning.
you know, but
curious how that all came together.
People watching and the ones who I can see in the chats, there's people who haven't been to my practices. So I try to mix it up. I always start with something that is just kind of like a warm up, because people roll into the practice at different times. And you don't want people that are ready to go just standing around waiting for other people to get their armor on. So I always start with some sort of warm up, like just join aside single death or some sort of just warm up resurrection. And then I try to do scenarios, not too complicated. Because one, I'm not schlepping like a lot of equipment around. I'm not bringing hay bales to practices. Something easy that I can do, either using ropes or cones. And, you know, I always try to do single death, and I always try to do some resurrection. I always try to do something that's like timed or controlled. And then from there, so that's what I have planned. But then when I get there, I got to see, well, who's here? And if we have a bunch of new people, then I may trash what I had planned and just work on just basics and not overcomplicated scenarios. And then I also look to, well, are there natural groups already, like natural households, and keeping them together, or, you know, natural baronies. So that's what I tend to do. But sometimes I do a one-off, and I'm probably going to do a one-off soon and do a practice that's really geared towards new fighters. Where we are in the North, we have a lot of new fighters that's like under 1 year. And so now I'm thinking maybe to do something more structured, not necessarily like drills, but just more basics with actual like instruction. Because typically I don't do instruction. Usually we fight and then we talk about it afterwards, and that's the instruction. But when there's a bunch of new fighters, I'm thinking maybe to just, you know, fundamentals, just work on that and then get them fighting and then talk about it.
Yeah, this is something I've noticed. So, and again, I'm not sure how far back Felix and Billy go, but Teagan and I go back. Teagan and I go back to like 93. Now, Teagan, you must have been like 5 years old back then.
That's right.
Yeah, I know you can't possibly be over 40 by now. But yeah, we go back a long time. And like back in the day, it was a lot more people, actually, a lot of kingdoms or a lot of units were built around. Penzig was almost a giant LARP. And when I say that, I don't mean like that there was actual role playing going on, but it was almost like a lot of people were there for the experience of going through an actual battle. Versus now, I feel like we have a lot more people who fight all the time. And when they go to Penzig, it's like, well, I don't want to bring a war shield because I use my tourney shield all the time. So they show up with their heaters, and maybe they do a lot more of these melee practices. And they're like, I don't want to just stand and be like an obstacle on the wall. So yeah, we get like a lot more like kind of like fluid movement, where back in the day it was like a lot more regimented. And I think our practices kind of reflect that. I've found that with the regimented practices, like these are the drills, this is how everything's going to work together, you get people from knowing nothing to getting up to speed to being able to do like a level 1 kind of like, you know, fighter but they never advance beyond that level. And so, like Teagan and I have talked about this with a lot of practices. Like, we just try to put people in situations to make them think, make them troubleshoot. A lot of times when I run practices, you know, this side's the blue team, that side's the yellow team, lay on. One team wins, the other team did a bunch of stupid things. And instead of telling them like what to do, like let them get together and, oh, we did this. And remember when you did that and they killed us, and, you know, this wasn't very effective. So let's do this. I kind of find there's like a lot of value in that. So yes, you talked about the northern region, and then I think Billy or Felix, you guys have, you know, you're sort of aware of some stuff going on down south. You have like a big sort of camp practice sort of thing at the beach, or no, it was at the beach one year. I don't know where it is now.
Well, you're referencing BOT, basic landing war training, right? So that's the brainchild of Alain de Rochelle. He's one of the Elephant Knights, based out of the Garner area, and that really evolved into a pretty cool situation where it drew folks, even though it was in the south, it drew folks from up north. Like Teagan flew in, right? I just had to get her spear there. And being at Myrtle Beach, like, you can take your family there, so that's pretty cool. But we also have had it at the War of the Wings site, which is Elkenberg Castle Farm this last year. And I think that the benefit of that larger collaborative space, which is really what it was intended to be, is the collaboration of the individual efforts. Like, we tried to codify individual efforts for practices in the northern and southern region, something like that, or like Victory on the Vine, which Teagan did recently. Allows us to implement those basic things to get folks to first level fighter, like you're talking about, and then try to level them up into small group, right? And so I think in the past, what Atlantia has done, there's been any number of drills or structured training. Heck, do just straight shield charges at each other in lines for a long time, and I love it, but the people in front of me hate it. But what works really well to get those folks collaborating is things like this last year we did triad drills, right? And so you'd line up and you'd be in a triad, and there'd be a triad in front of you, and you'd do basic melee stuff in a triad. And I grew up with triads, right? Me and Felix and Tyndall were in a triad, right? That gets
wait, was this our Tyndall?
Yeah.
Really?
I'm not name dropping or anything. Like, we loved him first. But that sort of collaboration, if you train it in those small groups, when you call that rally, it doesn't matter if it's Felix, it doesn't matter if it's Teagan. We know that Billy's going to go right, Teagan's going to be in the pocket killing people, and Felix is going to go left, right? And I think that sort of training that we do at BOT, in addition to fundamentals and scenario-based, we also train skills like allowing spears to the front, spears to the back. And those sorts of things is what we focus on in that event. And credit goes to others for organizing that. Full disclosure. Felix, you want to hop in there about any of that stuff?
I think you covered it well. I guess the only things I would add is, as a background, it was something that Elaine that came up with coming up out of COVID, just because a lot of people hadn't had a chance to go to practices, and even at practices, no melee, right? And so it was a way to kind of set a baseline for folks that were newer to fighting. There were even some practices going on where there were novices. I had a pandemic practice with several people that were novices going to the pandemic. I'd never really done much melee. So it was a way to kind of get those people together, as well as to, reset a baseline for some of the more experienced folks to, start participating in melees again. And we kind of kept it rolling. And then it as a group, but yeah, that definitely full credit goes to Sir Lane for again just kind of putting that all together, spearheading it, and it's kind of snowballed and become an annual thing we do, to the point where we oftentimes would have an event we call assessments before Penzik. It's a way for us to kind of assess the army before Penzik, and we ended up kind of using just the Elaine's template basically for that. As far as the types of things we do, Billy touched on it. We don't do a ton of, say, marching drills. I think back in the day we used to do a little bit more, where we'd get in a unit and it would be forward, backwards, wheel right, left, turn left, that type of thing. We don't do as much of that. We do some of that as part of a structured sport specific warm up. But I think for the most part, we try to do structured melee scenarios, and the scenario becomes the drill. And if you want to work on something in particular, you try to build that into the scenario itself. And if you do a good job, then people learn, and they have fun and they get better.
So I understand this year you guys trained pretty hard at grabbing a flag and holding it above your head. How did that work out at Penzic for you this year?
It didn't. I mean, I have to say just a funny anecdote about that. So for those of you who are listening, you may not be aware, but up until like Penzic, a lot of the Penzic scenarios were planned where there was a baton that had a red end and a blue end, and you had to hold it up, and it like there were timekeepers, and it was like time of possession. And then I just remember being in the Atlantia tent that Monday for the first cathedral battle, right? That was the Monday battle. Am I right? Yeah. And telling House Gilchrist, the guys in green, like, okay, we've been practicing this, you know this. And then we got the directive that scratch that, no batons, it's just flags like we've done before. And I literally went to Gilchrist and I was like, so what I just said, forget that, just ignore it. New plan. So
yeah, everybody has a plan until you get punched in the face, to quote Mike Tyson, right? And heck, I had stopwatches that we were ready to use, and those became, because we were measuring time, right? And talk about spending resources. The plan originally was the point went to the person who held that flag for the majority of the time. And so if you get to the majority of time and you confirm that that time's over, move to the next objective. So I got a dozen stopwatches. Anybody needs to buy any. But we didn't need those because it was then called on a timer, right? So yeah, we practiced that though. So what Teagan was saying is we were in a castle, holding stuff above our heads. Sir Shay got the tar beat out of him in those scenarios because he was trying to win that scenario for us. It didn't matter in the end, but we certainly tried to. We certainly practiced it.
So the reason I bring this up laughing is that, Teagan and I hang out about once a week, and this is like we're kind of, I've said this, we're kind of like Varys and Littlefinger in Game of Thrones, where like we sort of share the kingdom gossip and stuff. And she was just like, week after week, she's like, this holding the flag thing, and there's a time, and I was like, well, what's the big deal? It's just a flag. She's like, no, it's like really hard. And I do remember one of our war camps, I had the flag and I held it, and I was like, this isn't that big a deal. And then everybody in front of me died. And then I got hit by like 4 spears at the same time because I couldn't defend myself while I was holding this thing, which I think was one of the issues, is how hard it is to hold a flag, and you're not able to defend yourself. And again, I just love how seriously you guys take this, because my thought about this was like, oh, well, I won't be the one holding the flag then. Someone else will do it. I just, so I do like how concerned you were for the actual flag holder and how difficult it was. And my understanding is, I believe that they made the decision. Actually, I think part of the decision, if I remember correctly, was that it requires more marshals to be able to run the stopwatches. And we are already at sort of like a low number of marshals, or maybe like getting close to not meeting the threshold to run a battle. And also the idea that was as an extra level of danger to have somebody actually holding it and not being able to defend themselves or attack or whatever. Because ultimately, when the other team gets the flag, unless the person holding it just yields and like runs away, usually they're going to get hit and they're not going to be in a good spot. So, well,
and that resource that we were spending in that scenario is that person's effort holding that flag up and how many lumps they could take, right? And then it changed to, all right, it's on timer. Now we got to worry about people in places at times. So had to roll with the punches.
Yeah. And I did like some of the questions that came my way were like, well, are you allowed to throw the flag out of the hut? And I was like, it's not written, but I'm pretty sure that that's not in the spirit of the rules. Like,
what if you throw the flag bearer out of the hut?
Well, I think there was like one year there was a I think the first year that the rapier people did the Allied Champs battle, where Allied Champs, for anyone who doesn't know, is you grab the other team's flag and you run it back to your res point or to your flag, and then when both flags are there, you score a point, and then they reset the battle. And it's like an hour-long battle. And I think the first year the rapier fighters, like one team got up by 1 point, and instead of running their flag back to their flag, they just ran it back to a corner and kept it there for the rest of the battle. And then they came up with the new rule that was like, okay, you can't do that. You have to run it back to your res point, because the point of the battle was not to be able to do that. So we had an archery question here. Who wants to handle that? I think Cormac. Oh, you have it right there. All right. Want to talk about how Atlantian combat archers are integrated into the main fighting unit and their effectiveness. You guys have had, by the way, before we get into this, I will say, I remember I got back into this game like 10 years ago. You guys I think you guys got an award for your archers in Golf Wars. Could you just this must be before the Golf Wars, maybe it's the beginning of the Golf Wars reputation, because every Golf Wars I've been to, there's been a million archers. But apparently you guys just decimated the other side of the archers. And I think, what was it? The Atlantian archers got some award in court. And they walked up to get their award, and there was 2 of them, and someone yells out, "There were only 2 of them?" So you guys do have a reputation. I think you have a pretty good archery unit.
Yeah, and we try to foster it, right? And so I know that any number of melee events or practices we've dedicated, in fact, the first bought down in Myrtle Beach, we literally had a scenario that was a game where you buddy up with a shield person and the archer runs around behind you trying to score points on the other side, and you get closer the more points you score, and if you get killed you go back. So fostering archers is a part of Atlantean culture that I think differentiates it from other kingdoms. There's been many a Penzic where they've said, "Can you send some of your archers over?" And my immediate, I'm not the one in charge, I'm not the king. My immediate response is, if you like archers, you should build an archery army. But we try to do that. And as far as integrating them into the units, that first clip you pushed, you have folks who are shooting on the fly, which is a skill that they practice. And that's important for things like a field battle, right? In a static battle, you can let your archers eat the way you let spears eat at a greater distance. And so they're important for attrition, great, but being able to integrate them into the army in a dynamic sense is a real skill. Now, there's also times in which they can get in a situation where they get munched, right? And we don't want that. The field is a hard one, right? Because if you're not shooting on the fly, we're not going to stand there and give you a static front. We'll get munched.
Right.
It's a field battle. But yeah, to Cormac's point, that we absolutely keep those guys in our hip pocket. And if as a commander, if I can have somebody in my hip pocket and I can say, "That's Barry, kill Barry." I've done it, Barry. Love you, brother. It's an incredible resource. So I was just about to ask you that. I was going to ask you, what kind of people do you target? I was going to say, it better not be me. Well, no, the reality is the folks who talk a whole lot, right? So we train that too, right? So if they recognize, Barry, you love to talk to the host. But you see folks slinging orders, make them walk, right? And then all of a sudden, command structure falls down. It's especially in a limited rest scenario. But also being in somebody's hip pocket, I got a big old shield. I'm an archer's best friend, right? So they can tuck behind me. They may not even see them behind me, and they can duck out and then kill from 30 feet away. So I love those guys.
Yeah, the other thing I'd add in there is they're also baked into the command structure, right? So we have an combat archery and siege lead, Lewin, and I guess we've had a couple of people out, me and Teagan, as being obsessive planners and that type of thing. For it's as much as we do that for kind of overall command and things in our lane, Lewin is just as organized on the combat archery side. And I would say, if not more so, because there's a whole lot of logistics that comes with combat archery. So all of their equipment has to make it up there, has to be inspected, and then they have to deal with their ammo. And that becomes its own really huge service they provide is going through and collecting, sorting, and re-inspecting all that ammo for the next scenarios and things like that.
I'll tell you personally, I have I used to dislike archery, not as like people or anything like that, but like it made the game a little less fun for me. And I got to a point where like I went to the first Golf Wars I went to was in the Ravine Battle. And that year, if you guys have been to Golf Wars enough times, that year we had the long ravine. So the ravine was up to your left and right, and then we were fighting this way. Some years you're fighting down the hills, and this year we were fighting like long ways. And I would get up the front, and man, I just getting chewed up by archers. And I had this moment where I walked back and I got to the res point and I stopped. I literally just took a moment to like meditate, not physically, but like think about what I was doing. It's like, I need a new approach because this is not working. My old approach was walk up to the front, find a spot where I think I can beat the spears in front of me, whether it's because of numbers or skill level or whatever, and then just go until I get killed. And I realized that was not a good plan. And eventually I learned there's like this old like World War II movie saying I heard, which is like you never light a third cigarette or something like that. Like they would light a cigarette and then you use that cigarette to light a second one. Or no, it's like never light 3 cigarettes off of one match, because by the time you get to the third cigarette, the sniper has found you and fires. So I got to this point where I would get to the front and I would take like no more than 5 shots and then I would be out. And then I would still get shot. And then I realized 5 shots out, go to my knee so that they couldn't shoot over top of people and they'd forget about me. And by the way, there was a video I saw of Golf Wars one year, and it was from an archer's perspective. And it was fascinating. It was like watching a zombie video game. And the one thing that jumped out at me, like I'm just watching like almost like you can see the crosshairs on who he's targeting. I'm like, oh my God, that spear on the end of the flank is such an obvious target. Of course, he's going to shoot that guy. I remember one time seeing the exact same person come back from res and stand in exactly the same spot and get shot a second time. But what I was going to say about that is that if you don't have archers, then the spears become the most annoying thing on the field. So it does kind of balance out the battle. It's like this, if it's the shields just overrun all the spears. So then you have scenarios where you slow the shields down, maybe like longer battles or bigger battles on the field. And then the spears kill everybody. And then you bring archers out. And so, yeah, I've kind of like, it's been sort of a challenge to kind of like figure out how to deal with archers. Another question here. What do we have? Transition of youth into the army. There we go. Perfect. Can we talk about youth recruitment / transition to authorized fighters? How do we bring youth fighters into the ranks of the army? Northern Atlantia has tons, capital TONS, of potential for youth recruitment.
That's tough.
Do you guys call them youths in Atlantia, or the youths? Youths.
The 2 youths.
No, that'd be the East. We would call them youths. Teagan might call them youths.
So I'm just beginning. I have a 6-year-old. So my son turned 6 like 2 weeks before Penzix. So he was actually able to fight youth. I'm assuming that's Finn. That's the question you're asking about, is actual youth fighters, not just like fighters who are adults but new to fighting, right? Is that the question?
Yeah. I think it's bringing the youth fighters into
so what I'm learning is youth fighting is hard to organize because the marshaling requirement is a much higher standard, because you have to get a background check and there's more paperwork. And so finding people to do that is more challenging. And then finding the youth fighters who want to fight, it takes a lot of organization. Sometimes it's hard just getting a regular marshal at your practice, and then let alone finding a youth marshal. And I'll just give an example, and it's kind of sad. So we went to coronation this past weekend, and our son was excited to fight because we told him, it was a very long car ride from Washington, D.C. to North Carolina, but there's going to be fighting. And when we got there, the person who was going to bring all of the youth equipment and who was like the youth marshal wasn't able to show up. So we didn't happen to have a helmet for him, but we had everything else. So, note to mom, get my kid a helmet. And then it was like, well, are there other kids who want to fight? And are there other kids in that age group? There's different divisions in the youth fighting. So, and then it's like, then you have to have the youth marshal. It's just a lot more coordination, and it takes a lot of effort. And some of the people whose kids are fighting are fighters themselves. So it's like, you have to choose, well, am I going to facilitate my kid fighting and give up my fighting? It's not easy.
So how do you get the youths into becoming armored fighters? Is there like a recruitment program?
I am not aware. I don't know yet. I'm new to it. So
I've seen in the past a lot of attention paid to it. And I think that most of my exposure to the bigger initiatives is really at Penzig, right? And that's not specific to Atlantia. Like, so there's the Night of Nights, right? Or Nights Go to the Children's Fete and let kids swing at them, that sort of thing. But in the past, I know that there's been efforts put forth to really foster a community of varying age groups of youth fighters. And I've seen a lot of success come out of that. Like my buddy Alex, Sir Dogger, was second generation SCA youth, brought up in youth, and he's a killer, right? Just came up that way. The only other Teagan I know was a youth fighter.
mm-hmm.
And so I think as far as integrating them into the Army, I know that and I'm speaking from ignorance, I'm not a parent, right? But I know that there's been some hurdles about transitioning from the training regimen that exists for the game of youth fighting to the game of heavy fighting, right? And so, calibration, that sort of thing has been a hurdle. But yeah, I think that it has created some real opportunity and some real unique talent, right? And I've seen it firsthand in my 24 years in society. But I'm speaking out of ignorance a little bit.
Yeah, and I think a building block to that is probably one of the things that Teagan's thinking about rolling out in the northern region, which is melee practices focused on newer people, right? And so while youth fighters might have a lot of experience with something similar to armored rattan combat, it's not the same, right? But it might be that could be potentially a more appealing, welcoming, appropriate venue for someone that's kind of putting a toe into something similar but new.
Yeah.
Right.
And I also think that, maybe looking at other avenues for younger fighters, like foam weapon fighting, that may be, that's not this sport, but, there are other ways to get younger people into fighting that isn't necessarily armored, but then that could lead to armored later in life. Like, I started foam weapon fighting when I was 16, and a lot of people in Anglesey did too. So, and that was our kind of like gateway into armored fighting.
So Teagan, how many practices did you run in the last year?
5.
5?
Well, 5 from from between the Penzig to Penzig, 50 to 51, 5.
So in the fiscal year,
fiscal year,
Penzig fiscal year, you did 5 practices, and they're all in the northern region.
And they're all in the northern region, and I do try to rotate it because where we live, traffic is bad. I just joke, there are 3 baronies and a shire around me, and it still can take me 45 minutes to an hour to get to any one of them just because of the Washington, D.C. metro area. So we did 5. I do try to rotate it. So one is closer to Baltimore. One, I did 2 in Northern Virginia. I did 1 in Fredericksburg, and then 1 kind of like on the outskirts of Northern Virginia, and just to make it more geographically compatible to, the different groups of fighters that we have here in the north. I do wonder sometimes, would it be better just to have like one static place that everybody knows to go to? Would that create more consistency? But right now I'm still more about the moving the practice around and trying to accommodate, geographically where people are.
Yeah, that's a hard thing to work out, because it's like, is this the Washington Capitals hockey or is it the traveling circus, right? Yeah, no, I mean, seriously, like it's like if you have something that's regular and consistent and you get people coming into it all the time, and then if you have enough interest somewhere else and maybe you have a second one, or is it the kind of thing that people will only want to come to like once or twice, and then you sort of, move it around, or if you have people that are, willing to sort of move around. But that's great that you can find all those sites. That's always a hard thing for us, is
finding the site is one of the hardest things, because what I've found is there's no perfect site. I haven't found the perfect site yet. I think there's one that's pretty close. There's a knight here who has a pretty big property that has lots of features, that's including woods. That's really good. But nothing quite checks all the boxes, and I still would love to find a consistent indoor space for the winter. I know in the East Kingdom up north they have that. And cost is a factor too. Parks are easy because they're free, but to get something indoors that can actually accommodate, you're gonna have to pay.
Yeah, we have. It's funny because part of my experience with the SCA, and then, I've been reactivated in the SCA for about 10 years now. And then before that, I was doing bands. I was playing in bands. And like, that was the thing with when you're in a band, it's like, you have to plan, like, where do you play your show and how often you return to that spot. And then you start to like, balance out like, all right, is this one even worth it? Or how far do we drive to this? Remember my brother had a band once where they would have like a Friday show in like a sort of section of town that had like a lot of bars. Friday show, and then like literally the next night they'd have a show across the street, and they're like, oh, how come no one showed up on Saturday? It's like they all showed up on Friday. They don't want to go see the same band with the same songs 2 nights in a row. And yeah, it's the same thing with practices. It's like, how do you find that balance of like having the practice often enough but not too often, and having good locations, especially these days. Our northern region is lucky. They have someone found they call it the PAL practice, but PAL plant stands for Police Athletic League. So they found a police athletic league where they can rent out the gym. And I guess the floors are crappy enough that they're not scuffing them up any worse than they already are. Where are we now? You guys want, let me consult my list. I should have worn my glasses. God, I'm getting old.
Your arms aren't long enough.
What's that? My
Your
arms
aren't long enough. Yeah.
I will tell you that the time I realized I needed glasses when I was like at a Qdoba trying to read the ingredients on a bottle, and the nice guy behind the register grabbed the second one and read them to me. I was like, I guess it needs need glasses. How do you guys integrate like new commanders in your system? Obviously you guys aren't going to command forever. You're going to have to get new people in there. Teagan, you're a new commander. How did you integrate yourself into the system?
Just brute force. No, I mean, it's a challenge, especially if you didn't, like me, I didn't like grow up in the kingdom, right? Came from a mercenary household that is different, but also similar in some ways. They're more alike than people may realize. So just learning who everybody was initially was a challenge, especially in the South where I don't go as much. And I was like, okay, so who's that knight? And they're in which household? And okay. And so there's that. But yeah, I mean, part of, I think, being commander is you're also thinking about, well, who can you bring into the fold? And, because eventually you'll need a succession plan, right? So I'm always looking for that. And I think I mentioned this on one of the other coaches corners. I'm keeping an eye on, one, is there anyone who's approaching me and was like, hey, I would love to learn more about command. I'd love to do something. And I'll find a job for them, whether they are like put them on a flank or have them, be a small group leader. Or I'm also looking in the practices, like who's really vocal, who's taking charge, who's coming up with strategies and plans. And I'm thinking, aha, a mental note on that person. And I think I said this also too. It's like, I think it's hard because melee fighting is different than tournament fighting. And so not everybody wants, most people I think are still very focused on their singles and one-on-one. And then, so doing command can take away from that. So they may not be as willing to do it, but I'll let the others speak to this too.
Yeah, Billy, you want to take a crack, and I'll go third.
Yeah, sure. So I think the word succession planning is important, right? So me and Felix come from a very corporate background. Any leadership position, you should have your eye on succession planning. I really appreciate the fact that anytime I've been asked to do something, I've been given a good example of what to follow until you figure out what that's supposed to look like. And of course, coming up, watching folks helps. But yeah, picking the next people, I've always got my head on a swivel to see who has an excited idea of what command looks like. And I've seen a lot of, I say young, I mean, young's a relative term, folks who are upcoming in their SCA experience, who show an aptitude and an excitement about that topic. And specific individuals do come to mind from this last Penzing. Yeah, you got to want it. And that helps a lot. But as far as how it's done and how we're integrated, you recognize somebody's strengths and you remind them how to use those strengths. So Felix is like, hey, Billy, you're a business kind of guy. Can you handle all the communications to the army, right? And that gets me into the room for meeting with the East for strategic planning, which Teagan also was in that room with Felix. So I think cross training and redundancy is important. Yeah, I think that's going to be key for succession planning in any organization.
Yeah, so I'd just say if we were to look at this kind of more broadly, I'd say historically Atlantia is kind of relied a little bit kind of on the more organic kind of knight squire relationship as far as mentoring people in melee. And that's certainly where I came up in, and or the folks that are local to you. So it was much more kind of informal mentorship, right? I think that right now that still exists, but I think we're also evaluating doing something as structured as an army. I mean, I've certainly been really impressed, working with the East this year, say, for example, seeing how they bring people kind of into that structure and give them opportunities to learn new things. So I think that's a little bit on what kind of Teagan and Billy were talking about, is how we're kind of thinking about identifying folks who have the interest and aptitude, right? But if you were talking earlier about the fiscal year, we do have a strategic plan and future leaders, both in creating deputies for redundancy standpoint, as well as succession planning is something that we're going to work on in the next Atlantean fiscal year.
I like this question. Hey, Sadb, can you just post that on the screen? Would that be possible? Do you guys tend to promote people up the chain of command?
Give me a second. I got to put it in the actual Facebook comment.
All right, where's that voice coming from? If you guys are old, what was that, Muppet Show? They would do pigs in space whenever the narrator would talk. Where's that voice coming from? Do you guys tend to promote people up the chain for command, i.e., they need to start as a line commander, then work up to unit commander, regional, etc., or do you pull anyone who is both interested and seems to be good for the job, even if they're not already in the command structure?
Yeah, I'd say right now it's the latter. We don't have a formal promotion structure or anything like that, and I don't know that we necessarily will. It's certainly something to evaluate again the next Atlantean fiscal year. But I think that I guess we could use examples. I didn't serve as a regional commander or anything when I took over as warlord. My old squire brother Christoph, who couldn't make the show tonight, was the warlord, and he had a really bad knee injury, so he needed some help So I took over as a position that Atlantia uses periodically historically, as I was just the armored general, right? So I didn't necessarily participate in the training organizations. I just took care of the on the field at Penzig stuff. That being said, certainly a number of other people have gone from, say, being a local commander to a regional commander on up that chain. But I think, all things to evaluate. I don't know that we're going to get super corporate structured with assessments and things like that. But I do think it comes down to people's availability and aptitude. And then putting a structure in place to kind of support and train and mentor those folks.
Yeah, I think you guys use kind of the same system which the East does, which is you just steal them from mercenary groups.
Oh, yeah. I'll take full credit for that. That was I mean, Teagan was an obvious, great, innovative choice at grabbing a good, fully baked commander for sure.
Yeah.
Availability and aptitude. But I should say Teagan was also running practices in Kingdom already.
And she actually I think she kind of got your attention the same way I got the attention of the East Kingdom. And neither one of us did this with like any sort of like, looking for accolades or any of that kind of stuff. Like we really were just kind of like, hey, there's like local melee practices, or like I always tell people, I was like, at least for me personally, people are like, well, they say you're so amazing, Barry. I don't know if they say that. That's maybe early, maybe like 4 o'clock in the morning after I doze up back in the bed. I hear that. But it's like I always tell you, it's always purely for selfish reasons. I like to fight, and if there's not fighting around, then I need to make it happen. And and it's not that I created anything in the East, because we actually had handful of people. Probably Ryu was really instrumental in this. Count Ryu, he was just the Honorable Lord Ryu at the time, and getting like a melee practice going. And just at some point, he kind of started to back away from it, and we had some. I sort of stepped up and just was showing some more interest in it, just because again, we want to keep the practice going. And I know that Teagan just kind of out of the blue got together with Ursa and just created a practice in Baltimore, just kind of off the fly. You want to talk about that, Teagan? How that started?
Yeah, I mean, it actually was. You can give yourself credit for this one, Barry. It was actually like, was it right after you got knighted, or maybe right before? I don't know. But I was just like, it would be cool if you could bring some of your people down and I could bring people up, and we could meet in the middle of someplace. And then
that's right.
when I talked to Ursa,
we're bringing back the Pointless War.
Yeah, like kind of bring back the old Kingdoms Crusades from way back. And obviously my practice is not like that because there's no camping or facilities or anything like that. But and then we have a connection. Someone here in Atlantia had access to like a community park that was a pretty decent location for both like people to come down from north of Baltimore and people to come up from DC. And that's what kind of got it going. And it was successful. And I was like, okay, let's let it ride and see what we can do.
Yeah. And I imagine the Atlantians probably saw that and were like, hey, we're looking for somebody to run, to kind of do this stuff. So, no, that's good. That's good. Oh my God. Sorry. It's ADD Theater. Usually I have a co-host that helps me out with this stuff. Do you guys, I'm curious, for, your award system, I know that Teagan is a Baroness now. You've got, but like among your fighting awards, your Krakens and your knighthood, your Shiv, which I guess Atlantia is just knighthood, right?
No.
But, it's true, right? You guys don't have any masters.
I think we have a master who moved into Kingdom.
Oh, do you? Okay. But what is something like working in the melee side of the command structure? I know that even according to Corpora, it is tournament based is is sort of defines the peerage of a Shiv. But do you guys sort of look at this as like at least like kind of like a well-rounded sort of checkbox, to kind of help candidates along to kind of
Talk about melee or leadership?
Well, both, either or.
I mean, I've known a lot of people who I say the tagline or the joke is not a joke; it's a tagline. It was that their weapons form was melee, right? So yeah, tournament fighting obviously is a very visible representation. People can see it from the sidelines. But being able to command a presence and command others absolutely is something that I would consider when talking about someone for the qualities of being a peer. Absolutely.
Yeah, we have in the East. I mean, the East, like I said, it considers itself a melee kingdom. I actually be curious at some point, like how the mid sort of sees themselves, and just like compare and contrast like the two, because obviously they're the two principles at Penzic. Melee is a big part of it. And again, I say this to any unbelt candidate that it's like sometimes you think of it as an unbelt, you imagine there's like this like one giant collection of knights that are like, we all have the same opinions on everything and we're all like completely in agreement on how things are done, and it's not that way. You certainly have trends, and you certainly have things that move the needle in one direction or another, but like we have in some places, I mean, some people like melee is really important. Melee certainly matters to everybody in some respect, whether it's leadership. For me, I say like I'll look at a melee candidate, but like they can't just know the job. Like they have to be the one that Billy is telling the archer to shoot, basically, like that. You have to get the attention of the other leaders to say, you need to kill that person to, sort of really, blah, blah, or someone who's, maybe good at tourney, like really good at tourney, maybe not quite at the bar that the typical knight gets to, but then if they are well above that, average for the knights in melee, then that can sort of like push them over the bar a little bit. That's kind of like how I look at it. And that's kind of how I think a lot of people need to look at it.
Yeah, I don't know if we're going to be able to tease out all these details in the next 5 minutes. But
well, then how about how hard? How can I hit hard then? Let's talk about that one.
Yeah. It could be its own show. Happy to come back if you want to talk shop about that. I would just say, yeah, to your point that if we're talking about peerage, there are a number of other awards that could and do come to play for melee leadership as well as prowess in melee. But if we're talking peerage, I can only speak to the ship because that's my only peerage. Corpora there's a prowess requirement, and it's a weapons-based prowess requirement, right? And then there are peer-like qualities that you can certainly show through leadership. But I guess as far as prowess goes, you have to kind of evaluate it. I think that while it says in the tourney, I think that there is room for evaluating prowess in a candidate in melee, but you kind of gotta do the same things. You got to whoop up on the knights. And I guess the example I would use is, as an unbelt, there were some times where I'd roll through units 2, 3, 4 people. Like I'd roll through a knight and their squires. That showed probably as much, if not more, prowess than just beating one person. Mm-hmm. Right. So yeah, so I think that's how you would kind of try to evaluate that in a candidate. But yeah, it's an interesting, complex topic. I just don't think we can necessarily give it the proper amount of time.
Oh no, I just thought I'd throw it out there. It's
I think it's a valid thing that we should consider for sure. Yeah. And there's a lot of opportunities to display and a number of great qualities on the leadership side and on the prowess side.
And as far as getting knighted, to Felix's point, read Corpora. There's some specific stuff in there, right? Like that's a requirement. Prowess is in the list. I mean, yeah. know how to play chess. Teach 3-period dances.
Is that still in Corpora? I don't know if that's there anymore.
Yeah, so chess and dance are both in Corpora, but they're in an inclusive, not exclusive list.
So like if you're good at chess and dance, then like that could.
It's you could look at it as I usually shorthand it for folks as having a well-rounded SCA experience. You don't necessarily have to be good at all those things, but you have to do something other than just beat people up. But if we're again, I don't mind talking about Corpora. I just don't think we have necessarily the time. But there's ways that you can also demonstrate courtesy and hospitality, which are also really important portions of all peerages, including the Shiv, and are required in corpora. So very hospitable to folks when we're coming up before the melees and the melees at our melee practices, right? Are we courteous to people as we're giving commands, as we're training folks, as we're mentoring folks? I think there's a lot of really good opportunities to display those qualities within the melee construct.
Yeah,
are we being courteous to our opponents, right? I think that's crucial.
Yeah, it's funny. I was actually just thinking, I just had like a thought in my head about how melee kind of is different than the tourney fighting in that respect. But then I was like, well, it is different, but it's the same. So in tourney, you know, we bow to our opponents, you know, we show courtesy as we kill them, you know, if you win the fight, you know, you don't do like a dance or whatever. You obviously, you sort of show respect to your opponent, all that kind of stuff. And melee gets like a little more aggressive, like more like a football game, but you still have these like, whoa, this person's like in an unsafe position, or that person's clearly yielding, so don't hit them hard. Or, you know, I've been in situations where it's like that person doesn't see me, and according to the rules, I could totally kill them, but we're going to win this battle anyway, so let me give them like a sporting chance. Or, you know, or this person has been fighting for 2 years and I've been fighting for 30 years. So let me use like this is like kind of a teaching moment, like, hey, make sure you watch. I'm gonna stab you if you don't look over here. You know, things like that. And so you might look at maybe like an unbelt candidate and be like, oh, wow, this is like a very mature leader on the field who's not just looking to like, haha, I got 9 kills today because I totally like, you know, and I hurt them and they walked off the field like, you know, very bitter that I was there, you know, like that's not such a maybe a good quality.
Well, be a part of the dream that you want to see, right?
Yes. And let them enjoy the dream as well, right? So yeah. I think we're about out of time here. So but we don't have like you know, the Heidi movie coming up that we've got to that's an old NFL football reference where they a game I think was running late and they had the movie scheduled, so they just cut right to the movie without watching the end of the game. But any final thoughts here? Let's go to Sir William Bedford.
Yeah. So first off, thanks for having me, guys. I think that we've covered a lot, and there's even more that we could have covered. So I think my parting shot will just be, I like what I said before, be a part of the dream that you want to see. So if you want to see courteous and effective command on the field, you want to be a part of an effective army, take an active part in training an effective and courteous army. All
right. And let's go to Baroness Teagan right here. I'll give you a massage. I'll massage your scalp while you're talking.
Oh, please don't. Oh, I was just going to say, first of all, this is my 3rd Coach's Corner, so I'm very glad to be back and part of this. And I just want to just like put out there that, you know, fighting melee is fun. It's fun to be in a group. It's fun to work together as a team. It's fun to strategize. And if there are people, especially in Atlantia, who want to get involved with that, come talk to one of us. All right. I think like there's a place for everybody, whether you're a bigger, slower person or a younger, faster person or an archer or a spear. We will find a place for you.
And then on to Sir Felix Del Rey. I'll give you a shoulder massage while you're talking.
Thanks, buddy. So I don't know if I could really say anything better than what Sir William and Baroness Teagan put it. I think that I would just underscore that if you're interested in melee and you're in our kingdom, please reach out to one of us. I promise there's a valuable contribution you could make, and we would love to support you. And it's also a chance to be, you know, part of the dream that you want to see. But I guess speaking more broadly, if it's also anyone that ever wants to talk shop about melee and how to get involved, I'm definitely happy to talk shop with those folks as well. And I appreciate the invite to come here and speak with you fine folks this evening.
All right. Awesome. Thank you so much. Atlanteans, some of my favorite people. You're a top 3 kingdom of mine. It's between the East, Atlantia, Ethelmark, and the Mid. 3 of you are in the top 3. I won't say which one's not.
Barry, you're going to get in trouble.
I'm amazed I haven't gotten in trouble yet.
Thanks everybody who's watching. We appreciate you.